Hello, it's Victoria from VixEcoDesigns here, and I'm here with a video number 4, tutorial number 4 on invisible darning. Invisible darning on woven fabric. As I explained before, I'm using methods from this book, which is an old book published in Soviet Union, which called Artistic Darning. This book is not very visual, as you can see inside. There's not really a lot of pictures, so mainly it's text. So I'm trying to decipher the text in these methods as much as I can. So basically in this video we're going to do a darning by weaving fabric back over the hole. So as you can see, I've got a little piece of fabric here with a hole. I will explain later what I'm doing. So basically, before we start, there are a few things that you need to consider. First of all, you need to know the weave of your fabric. Because you're going to reconstruct the fabric, you need to know exactly what weave you're going to reconstruct, whether it's plain weave, basket weave, twill weave. I'm not going to go into detail about the weaves. You can easily Google that up, but basically you need to know what weave you're going to be reconstructing before you start. Also, you need to determine your fabric's warp and weft. This is because you need to be using warp thread over the warp direction and weft thread over the weft direction. For the fabrics like that, it might seem not as important, but it is, because of the different threads have basically different strengths and structure. But if you have, let's say, a yarn dyed fabric with warp and weft of different colors, this is very important, obviously. Also, you might have fabrics which have patterns made by various colored threads or patterns printed onto the fabric. So you need to make sure that you have threads of exactly same colors that you need to replicate over your hole. Another thing you need to do is you need to get hold of the threads that you're going to be weaving the fabric with. I have here a little piece of 100% wool crepe fabric, which is rather fine, and it seems that the threads that I have here, warp and weft, are exactly the same, but in fact they are not. My warp thread is very thin, but it's very sturdy. My weft thread also, it's very springy. As you can see, when I pull it, it sort of springs. And this is because it's crepe fabric. This thread is twisted a lot, and obviously it has different structure to the warp thread. And therefore I separated them into two different piles, so I know which one I'm using exactly. Another thing you need obviously a needle. I recommend a needle with a rather thick, rather big eye. I hope you can see that I have my eye is quite big, and this is because when the thread's going to be passing through your fabric, it's going to get damaged, obviously. So when your eye is rather large, it creates sort of a bigger channel for your thread to pass through, and your thread not going to be damaged as easily. Another thing, the threads, I do not recommend to have them longer than these, really, which is how much, about maximum 10 centimeters. Again, this is for the reason when your thread is going to be passing through the fabric, it's going to get damaged. So the longer your thread, the easier it's going to get damaged, and you will have to cut it anyway. So to have shorter threads, it's actually an advantage. Another thing I'm going to be using here is a needle threader. It's much easier to thread these sort of threads into the needle with that way, for sure. Then you would need sharp embroidery scissors or any sort of small sharp scissors to cut the unnecessary threads. And another thing, it's either chalk or dried soap to mark your fabric. So to start with, you need to take your fabric, stretch it over embroidery hoop, so your fabric is stretched, and when you do the weave, the threads are nice and stretched, not loose. And you're gonna need to mark your hole around. I'll show you. So you see what I've done here? I sort of drawn a little square around the hole, and as you can see here, I drawn the square sort of about 0.5 centimeter from it away from the hole in each direction. This is because if you draw it too close, when you're going to do the weave, your loose threads will start to come out and will interfere with your weave, and they're going to be on your way. So I recommend at least 1/2 centimeter away from your hole. Another thing I highly recommend having when you're doing this sort of job is hands-free stand-in magnifying glass. I've ordered that on eBay. That was a magnifying glass for jewelry repairers, but I found it's really good for this kind of darning things, because I can just put it in, look through my magnifying glass and see exactly what I'm doing. I've tried to do this type of darning a few times before without the glass, and the result was not as satisfactory, because especially on a dark fabric like that, my eyes getting really tired, and if you can imagine, the weave is quite fine, and replicating that, I was skipping threads and it was a nightmare. I could not do it 100% invisible. I will show you, I have a little sample here. So you can see this area I attempted to darn already. You can see it because I did not catch all the threads. Basically, I did not reproduce the weave of the fabric 100% because I was skipping threads. I could not see properly without the magnifying glass. Now about the process. The process sounds very simple. You take your warp thread, you create a layer of warp threads on the warp direction. This is my warp direction, and that's where I'm going to be recreating the layer of warp threads. This way, once you finish that, doing the warp thread, you take your weft threads and weave the fabric over your warp. That's it. Sounds very simple, right? Now let's get into details. Now to start, you take off your needle with your warp thread about 1 centimeter away from your hole down, from your square, basically your marked square. You leave a tiny piece here, maybe a few centimeters. I hold it with my finger. Then on this side you prickle your needle back pretty much at the same place where you've started. Then you prickle once again somewhere in the middle, in between your marked line and where you've started, so you barely see, you don't see the needle, basically you just see a little prickle. Then you lift your needle back up exactly at the beginning of your chalk mark. Now you lay your needle across, basically here. So I put my needle back on the other side in this corner. Then I do another tiny prickle and another tiny prickle, as you can see. So I've got 2 prickles on this side, and take the needle onto another side like that. So I've laid my first thread. Now a few important things to consider here. Hole, this is your marked chalk line, and this is the threads you're layering. The first important thing to consider, that the threads, when you layer your threads, they need to be exactly parallel with the warp threads of your fabric. If you, let's say, take a thread out here, but put it back a few threads right or left, your darning is going to be visible because you're going to be twisting the fabric. Basically, you're not going to recreate the exact weave of the fabric, but it's going to be twisted at an angle. So you need to make sure that that's why the magnifying glass is very helpful. You need to make sure you go exactly parallel to the warp threads of the fabric. Another thing, when you do your prickles, let's say this is the first thread I laid. Can you see it? Let me check. Like that. So this is the first thread. I did 2 prickles, then I lifted the needle at the line, came back and did 2 prickles, right? When I go back, my prickles should be shifted against the first ones, maybe 1 millimeter or 2, so they're not exactly on the same line here, because that will create a much thicker layer of fabric over here. So when I go back, as you can see the dots, I shift my prickles 2 millimeters down, 2 millimeters down, lay another thread, and again here I shift my prickles against these ones, 2 millimeters down, 2 millimeters down. Again, when I come back on my third thread, my third thread prickles should be on the same level as the first ones, and so on. And so you continue basically until you cover the whole square. Another thing, your thread's going to be laid with the same density as your warp thread of the fabric. You can sort of take your fabric and check how dense your threads needs to be. If you layer less threads, then your fabric, your darning again is going to be visible. It's basically going to create a finer woven fabric over your square. So again, that's why magnifying glass is very helpful, so you can kind of check back if you prickle exactly over a thread, each warp thread. So now I will be laying the warp thread. I'm trying to preserve the density, obviously, of my threads. Also, I'm doing that through magnifying glass, so I see which threads I'm doing. I hope you can see that briefly through on my video. I'm finishing my thread. I'm possibly gonna do one more layer with that one, and it's finished, and then I'll be continuing like that until I cover all the whole. So this is a close-up. I've only started. I will come back to you when I cover it up completely. Just one more thing before I continue. I thought I'll show you how I finished the thread. So this is the end of my thread. What I do when I layer the last thread over the hole, I basically do 2 prickles and simply turn the thread to the other side. I will have a long end stain here. I will simply trim it off a little bit, but not to the very end, and just leave it like that. I will take care about all the ends at the end of my work, and that's all. I don't do any knots, any fixing, anything like that, just taking the thread to the other side, and that's it. Okay, before I show you the finished warp thread layer, and before I start with the weft, I wanted to say a few words about the weaves again. I mentioned that I have a fabric with a plain weave. The plain weave actually looks like that, where you have threads. When your warp thread goes straight, and when your weft thread goes under one warp thread, over one thread over, one thread under, one thread over, one thread under, like in the crosses here. And the next thread goes basically the vice versa, under, over, and so on. So because I have crepe, which is a variation of plain thread, my weft threads would not go exactly one thread under and over, and it would look something like that. Basically, to determine more exact structure, I would have to look under the magnifying glass how many threads each line needs to pass, go over or under. But because crepe is irregular, it's basically something like that with a motif. And I will just try to recreate the irregular structure, but basically what I'm trying to say that you do not go one thread over, one thread under, and so on and so forth. But with the crepe, you sort of vary that to recreate the exact structure of the fabric. Okay, so this is my finished warp thread. before you continue, you need to check whether you're happy with the results. So take a blunt end of your needle, go under all the threads and basically do that. Whether you're happy with the evenness, or if you, like me, I slipped a few threads over my line, I would need to take care of that when doing the weft thread. So check that. Check if you're happy with the density, which is the most important thing. Basically take the ends of your fabric, roll it over your needle like that. Check the density and then do exactly the same over your hole. See that you don't see the needle blinking through anywhere. I'm kind of quite happy with that. I think it looks quite good. I did have a few threads going just below the lines and over the lines here, but I will try to manage and care of that when I'm doing the weft. Now the weft, which is the most important and I'd say the hardest, and it will take the longest time. Now the weft, you take your weft threads, thread into a needle. Again, you start similar way. You start about 1 centimeter down from the hole. I'm starting from the bottom left corner. Take my needle up. Now again, I leave a tiny thread on the other side. Maybe a few centimeters. I hold it with my finger, turn it around like that. Then again I go on the other side, do one prickle on the way and lift my needle exactly at the beginning of my layers of my warp threads, like that. Now is the most important thing. Now I need to go under and over. Again, here you just follow the weave of your fabric, so I'm not gonna confuse you with telling exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to replicate the crepe weave, which will be quite irregular and there is not a very definite pattern. So I just basically do the following. Okay, one important thing, somewhere in the middle I had one warp thread going slightly down, so I make sure I go over that so it does not stand out. Okay, I've gone through. Now I take my needle through all that, make sure it lays closer to sort of that end. Then I put it down exactly where my threads finish. I do maybe one prickle and take the needle like that. So now I continue. I again take my needle, as you can, I'll take my needle over, maybe 1/2 centimeter this time. Take it to the bottom, again lift it just at the beginning of my warp threads. And then I'm gonna weave it through again, making sure I do not go over and under the same threads I went over and under on the first layer, but basically alterating them. And so I continue until I weave the fabric. A few things I want to mention before I just go on and do these things. Oops. If you made sure, and if you made a distance about ½ centimeter from your hole to your left, right, and to your left, you do not need to do such a big distance for prickling, like about 1 centimeter as you do for warp threads. So basically you can have about ½ centimeter prickles just to make sure that the threads is nice and tight. Basically, when you're doing your weft thread, make sure you don't overstretch your thread if you haven't grabbed like me, so your thread does not get stretched while you weave it in, because otherwise, again, your weave will be visible. Also, as I said earlier, you don't really have to go that much over your hole, so you need to leave maybe up to 5 millimeters, sometimes even less, 3-5 millimeters gap. The only way where you need to go over is basically when you only start or finish your thread. When you fix your thread, start about 1 centimeter, do 2-3 prickles before you start, then weave. Then when you go back, do 3-5 millimeters sort of loop, go back, and when you fix your needle again, once you finish the weave, do 2 or 3 prickles, go on the other side and leave a little tail and cut it, so it's your thread is fixed properly with 2 or 3 prickles. Okay, so I continue. To make the video shorter, I will basically keep going until I finish, and we'll come back to you with the final results. So I've finished and it looks like that now. You can see the edges where my square was, because that's where basically the concentration of all the threads are, because it's created basically another layer of fabric on top of the hole, which is an extra thickness. I'm gonna iron and steam it now and come back to you and show the final result. Okay, so this is how the final result looks. This is where the hole was, just here, and this is the other side, all the ends. I deliberately didn't trim them so you can see how it looks like, but you can obviously trim them up to the ends and it will look neater. But if you do it for a garment, and this type of fabric, the wool fabric, is normally used for lined garments, and it will be under your lining, I wouldn't bother to trim the threads because they're not going to be visible anyway. It's only if you have unlined garment and if you want a neater finish. I tried to do the video as much explanatory as possible. I tried to cover all the details, but if you still have any questions, you're very welcome to contact me. You can post a question under the video, you can contact me via Facebook or my Instagram at VixEcoDesigns, and I'll happily answer all your questions.